morning, and welcome to the Kimberly St. Clair Show. This morning I have the incredible opportunity to speak with Pastor Julius Sims and Dr. Amy Nariskin. Pastor, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, good morning to you. My name is Julius Sims, and I pastor the Word of Life Christian Church in North St. Louis City.
Good morning, Kim. I'm Amy Nariskin, and I'm Chief Executive Officer of my own business, Empowering Partners.
The reason I think these two are incredible is because of the platform the two of them have created together. And I can't imagine any better time for this platform to be created. Together, these two have come together with the Courageous Conversation platform, where they're bringing two different races, two different genders, as well as generations together to empower people to discuss very tricky conversations. Explain that to us, Dr. Nariskin.
Well, Julius and I got started shortly after Ferguson imploded, and the rioting wasn't letting up, and nobody in my West County world wanted to talk with me about it, and conversations weren't happening in my kids' schools. I called Julius and I said, why is it, I'm not from St. Louis, why is it that people don't want to talk with me about what's going on? And as he and I continued our conversation, we realized, well, I remember you saying, actually, that within your community, you were somewhat accustomed to tragedy. And what was happening in Ferguson wasn't too surprising, but your white friends didn't really want to talk with you about it. You weren't surprised that my white friends.
Pastor Sims, explain how that affected you.
Well, I thought it was somewhat interesting that here's a white lady wanted to talk to me about what was going on in Ferguson, and the question that was, I thought, so powerful was, she asked what was going on within my community, among my peers. And I said, well, this incident and the series of things that have been going on, we just considered it to be normal stuff when there tends to be racial uprising. And but however, the colleagues that were in my life that were white, they was not very open. They weren't very forward in having a conversation of this nature. So I thought it was very interesting.
That is interesting. And let me explain to our viewers exactly where we are. We are in St. Louis, Missouri, home of Ferguson. And it's very important that you understand this, because those of us who live in St. Louis, we understand this dynamics, but others that don't will not understand this. So let me explain this to you. St. Louis is very polarized. Black people live in one neighborhood, white people live in other neighborhoods. Poor people live over here, affluent people live over there. So when I tell you about the dynamics of these two people, we're talking about Pastor Julius Sims, who was born in the 50s in the Deep South, Jim Crow area. Okay, accustomed or no stranger to racism and discrimination as a black male, you can only imagine. And then we have Dr. Amy Nariskin, born in an affluent white family off the coast of. You said you were off the coast.
I was born in San Francisco Bay Area.
There was San Francisco Bay Area, completely white environment, rich kid. Born in the 60s. So we have incredible dynamics here that have come together. When I tell you Word of Life Christian Church sits in the heart of North St. Louis, okay? The heart of North St. Louis. And am I correct in saying this would be considered a bad neighborhood?
Oh yeah, according to the news media, you will find a lot of crime in this sector of the city, which is North St. Louis City.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is an area where no white people, number one, or let's take a little further, from West County, okay, because St. Louis is divided into north, south, east, and west. So West County is affluent, where the richer subdivisions and people live. North City, poor black folk, okay? So for Dr. Nariskin, from West County, to get in contact with Pastor Sims of North St. Louis City, this is a big deal. So I really wanted them to understand the courage it takes for Dr. Nariskin to even drive into this neighborhood. People don't even come down 70. Some white people in West County don't even come down 70 because of the racial divide. So that's very important to know as we go forward, and you really get to understand what their platform of Courageous Conversations is about.
You know, Kim, it's so interesting that you bring up that dynamic and that example. Just briefly, about 2 weeks ago, we have a white family that's a part of our church. And one Sunday morning, our white sister was on her way to the church, and as she was exiting the highway, she took a different route, and she noticed a police car near a service station that was parked. Well, as she passed the service station, lo and behold, the police officer followed her. And she saw the police officer in her rearview mirror. And she noticed and was wondering, okay, am I going to get stopped? Well, she came all the way to the church, and when she parked and got out, the policeman pulled alongside of her and asked her, was she lost? She said, no, I'm not lost. She said, that's my church. And he was just stunned to think that he was a white woman on a Sunday morning going to a black church.
Even the police are stunned. Okay? So that further drives home
absolutely.
the glory, the irony of this union. So even the police officers are stunned when they see white folks traveling to North St. Louis. So that just really further drives home the irony of this platform and the location. So let's go back. You said that it was birthed out of the tragedy of the Ferguson incident and your horror of the situation and the fact that no one was talking about it. Pastor Sims, you stated that, you know, we're not used to tragedy, but this is not an isolated incident.
No, it was just a common a common phenomenon, and I just felt personally this is stuff that just goes on so often involving black folks.
So talk about how the birth of this really happened and how you felt about it. I mean, like, you know, what did your wife think? This white woman from West County wanted to come in and talk about race relations, and how did your husband think? Like, I'm thinking, we're in West County, we're safe. Why do we need to talk about what's going on in North St. Louis? We don't know anybody over there. How did that manifest?
Well, to be honest with you, I was a little bit complacent, a little bit passive about stepping into this because I didn't know Dr. Richkin's motive. And there was a lot of things that was going on in my mind because this was the first opportunity that I have really experienced in which a white lady was really sincere about talking about the issues. And of course, there were a lot of things that I had to debunk and really get rid of out of my mind because my wife and I were thinking, oh, we got some white folks that are coming and going to help us with our problems. You know, we have some white person, this is a white professor that's going to help us, you know, fix our situation here in the black community. But after hearing Amy's heart, and after the sincerity, and of course with the relationship that we had in our doctoral program, I sensed that there was something very serious and something very sincere. You know, so, and as a leader, whether in the educational field or the church, as a leader, I was somewhat compelled to say, Julius, let's jump into this. Let's get a chance to see that.
Now, as a Caucasian female, and I just want to say that we're going to constantly be drilling down on race because it is important for this particular conversation. As a Caucasian female in West County, who probably you're not related to any black people, you didn't know anybody you didn't know anybody in Ferguson, but obviously the tragedy of that did something to your soul. Have you always been a change agent? Have you always been a person that fought for justice? Have you picketed before? Have you know?
Actually, no, not outwardly.
Protested in any of the
No, I haven't done any
situations?
outward physical protest or picketing, but I have never shied away from that which is hard. And it was embarrassing to me as an educator that my kids' school district were shying away from a tough topic that needed to be talked about. And it wasn't, it was something that, it wasn't to be avoided.
Right.
It was to be addressed. It was a reality. So one of the things that bears, I am a white woman, I'm actually not Caucasian. I'm not from the Caucasus Mountains.
Okay.
That's where the root of that word is.
Okay.
I'm just white. But I'm married to a man who's half French and half Russian. So actually he is Caucasian. His
Okay.
family would have come from the Caucasus Mountains originally. But because Cyril, my husband, didn't grow up in the United States, I'm already living in a home where we are conscious of cultural differences and navigating cultural ways of thinking, different perspectives. And a European perspective, a French perspective, they tend to be a little bit more thinking historically and thinking back, whereas Americans, white Americans, tend to be thinking forward and thinking about the future, to the detriment that we forget about our history and where we've come from. So the fact that Cyril and I are negotiating that on a regular basis is prevalent in my thinking. And so when Pastor Sims and I began our conversations, I realized the way we were talking with each other similarly was about cultural differences. And with regard to race is about cultural differences, but with a power differential. And I was very aware of the fact that, and self-conscious, that I was white and calling Pastor Sims as a black man. But I decided that my hesitation wasn't a good enough reason not to begin the conversation.
So it sounds to me that this was a natural extension
Yeah,
of your diversity already,
yeah,
which was an opening for your awakening. Now, when we spoke earlier about these conscious conversations, and when I read your blog, one of the terms you talk about and use a lot is the awakening and the aha moments, and that is a term that we would use throughout this interview. I want to know, Pastor Mims, let's just drill down on your preconceived ideas coming into this and how they have been debunked as of now. So, as a youth from the South, with your experiences as a black man living in St. Louis, what did you know, what did you come to know from your own personal experiences about white people?
Well, the key word that you mentioned is the personal experiences that became embedded within my mind growing up in aspects of the Jim Crow era, you know, and that had been a major framework in my mindset for a number of years, just like many African Americans. However, I can say that I had positive relationships with whites during my adolescence and during my high school years, but forgot to, and as I look at this, I have said so often, God has a sense of humor. You know, he has a sense of humor to bring a white colleague from West County to talk to a black guy who understands Jim Crow, and for both of us to look at something that we both need to unpack and to learn. You know, so I think it was Christ that was the major element in my heart, and I think that it's also involving the idea that God requires reconciliation.
Okay.
You know, so there was some pieces that was in place that allowed me to say,
So your ground was fertile.
yes, I think that's a good term, because if I had been a militant all my life and been somewhat of a pro-black advocate all my life, and if I had been taught that the white man is the devil, then I probably would not have been in this posture to hear what needed to be talked about, what needed to be learned. So there have been some things that have been debunked, because one thing I really believe now, in which I can't say I always felt that way, that all white folks are not bad.
That's the truth. You're sitting next to me.
so far so good. No promise. The jury is still out.
Dr. Nariskin, tell us, in living in a completely white environment, how did that shape your consciousness in terms of black folk? What did your environment tell you about black people and how to respond, react, treat, live amongst?
Well, just like Pastor Sims is talking about his background, the fact that I'm a corporate brat, I was raised in a corporate family and moved around a lot growing up. So, and because my father started businesses for the corporation and companies around the world, cultural differences are fairly normal to me. And so I didn't really grow up with kind of a black and white mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It's more, and it's part of the reason I could marry a Frenchman. Folks just have cultural differences and different ways of doing things, and not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just the way you've been conditioned, and we're all conditioned, educated differently. With regard, how was I conditioned? Let me just address that question. Within white culture, don't think about race a whole lot. You don't need to. You're part of the majority, you're normal, and you're getting along just fine. So I may have thought about race once a month, once a year. That's all a white person typically would need to. But so where do you get your information about black people?
Exactly.
It's really going to be formed by the media,
That's what I mean.
right? And but the other piece of it is that I'm not sure people of color know is that white folks in white culture were shamed as children to point out differences. In fact, our parents whisper about it. She has cancer, or they're Jewish. It's always a dropped voice, and you're punished as children for pointing out differences that somebody's black. So you're shamed as a child in majority culture for talking about that which makes people unique. And so part of it is we don't talk about race because we are the standard, but the other piece is you're shamed as a child. And so now as I work with adults in my business Empowering Partners, I have to help them get over that initial, you're a bad kid feeling on the inside if you point out somebody's very obvious difference.
That is an excellent point, because I believe I just got a little bit of an aha moment, because that shame that you speak about was internalized by us as being shameful.
Right.
And
You
so
should be
who
ashamed
knew?
of, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Who knew
Right.
that it was you? Who knew
Right.
that the whole premise of that is the avoidance
Right.
of talking about difference, because maybe the shame was we don't want to make people feel different. But in not talking about it and not embracing it, you did just the opposite.
Isn't that ironic?
Isn't that something?
It's just,
Isn't that something? And
Yeah.
so these are the types of conversations that they have at this Courageous Conversations,
Yeah.
which is so powerful, because it's one thing to be forced to have the conversation, like when the Mike Brown Ferguson thing kicked off and we had
Just
it was
doesn't
in your
work.
face.
Yeah.
Doesn't
But
work.
it's another thing for people to voluntarily
Yes.
come out of their comfort zone
Yeah.
and have the courage
Yeah.
to stand in an atmosphere and speak a truth to them. The courage it takes to be willing to have that truth
Right.
debunked in
Right.
front of a crowd
Right.
is just phenomenal to me.